Hello and welcome to Chapter 18 as we continue our evolution stuffs. This one is going to be about invertebrate diversity, basically things without a backbone. And yes, I will do my best to keep from doing goofy jokes about that one. Okay, so, well, I just tried to do that and I didn't do it successfully, so let's try it again. There we go. So our introduction here is all about huge amount of diversity. There's a lot of different types of insects for everything. Oh my gosh, there are mounds and mounds and mounds of insects. And when I say insects, yes, I mean insects, not necessarily just bugs, because bugs are one type of insect, just so you know. So we have different shapes and sizes, habitats, diets, mating habits, and a whole bunch of other things. We're going to cover some of these throughout, but trust me, the entire presentation is not just about insects. So we have more than 1 million species, and nearly 3/4 of all animal species are insects. So yeah, when you look around and think that there are insects everywhere, you're really not imagining things, because there are. Insects! I don't know. I think they're interesting. But then again, in grad school, I actually took a course called entomology, which is the study of insects. So I do find them rather fascinating. Big ideas. We have animal evolution and diversity and the invertebrate diversity. So we're going to talk about how the animals move on up, and we're going to talk about inverts. And what is it about beginning that makes Fang decide he has to come up here? Okay, come on. Off the table. There you go. And he'll probably jump up again. Meanwhile, Osiris is just sitting over here staring out the window because it's an interesting day. I know it might not look like it because it's pretty dark, but it's actually almost 10 o'clock in the morning. It's just a very, very overcast day, and I'm wondering if it's going to start raining again. So, animal evolution and diversity. What is an animal? Well, it's not a plant. It's not fungi. We already covered that. Animals are eukaryotes, which mean, again, true nucleus. So an animal cell has a nucleus, which you should already remember from, say it with me, Bio 1, 2, 3. They are multicellular heterotrophs, which means they have more than one cell and they need to get their food from somewhere else. And they also have cells that lack cell walls, again from Bio 1, 2, 3, when you had to compare an animal cell to a plant cell. Animals also use something called ingestion, which is eating of food. So ingestion is the actual act of obtaining said food. The life cycles and embryonic development also distinguish animals from other groups of organisms. This is why last week you had to do the embryology lab. Now, animal diversification began more than 500 million years ago, so way back then. The oldest animal fossils were about 560 million years ago. All of these are impressions of soft-bodied animals that vary in shape and size. Sorry, trying to remember if I kept any of the pictures in here of the fossils. But anyway, in your book it shows you plenty of these pictures. So the animal diversification accelerated rapidly. So this means all of a sudden everything started changing. What happened here are all of these soft-bodied animals slowly became hard-bodied, as in they got shells and spikes. So here we go. There's one little bitty. Oh, I can do the laser pointer. Wee, laser pointer. Right here. This is actually a fossil. This is a fossil of what they believe this animal. Well, this is the actual fossil. This is what they believe it looked like. So there you go. Got our little spiky legs and stuff. I don't know. I think they're pretty cool. So. Of the 35 or so animal phyla, remember phyla, phylum. This is one of those things you're supposed to be remembering. One of these include vertebrates, which are animals with a backbone. However, as I said at the beginning of this, we are covering invertebrates, which mean they do not have a backbone. So about 96% of animals are invertebrates. First checkpoint question. What are two major differences between the fossil animals from the, and I can't do the word, I'm so sorry, Ediacaran and the Cambrian periods? There we go. I have no idea how you say that. I tried. There we go. The first ones were all soft-bodied, which we mentioned a moment ago. The Cambrian animals had hard parts like shells. Few of the original ones can be classified as members of present-day groups, so that means they're gone. That would be extinct. Extant means that they currently exist. And I'm telling you this now because as we go through stuff, you're going to start seeing the word extant. That's why. And many Cambrian animals are clearly related to present-day groups, and we are going to be covering some of those today. Now, we need to talk about the actual body plan. Animal body plans vary. And I don't mean as in someone sat down and went, okay, here is my plan to make a body. I mean the way it's laid out. So we have symmetry. We'll have an image of that when we talk about radial versus bilateral versus asymmetry. Presence of true tissues, number of embryonic layers, presence of body cavity, and details of the embryonic development. Again, throwback to last week's lab. Wow, that was fast. We quickly got to this type of symmetry thing, didn't we? Radial symmetry. Notice they took a sea anemone and they just showed you can cut it however you want. In class, I normally actually go ahead and talk about a pizza, because most people, when you get a pizza, and I'm talking old school round pizza, not a specialty square one, but a round pizza, you can cut it in half this way, it's going to be the same two halves. If you cut it this way, still the same two. Cut it this way, still the same two. So radial means you can cut it any way you want to like that, and it's always going to be the same. Hence, radial, radius. Bilateral symmetry, it means one half is about the same as the other half. It depends on how you cut it. So if you take a person, please don't, it's illegal and gross. But if you take a person and you cut them straight in half down like this, you know the right side is going to be very similar to the left side. But if you cut them in half across here, the top half is nothing like the bottom half. That is why this is bilateral symmetry. Lateral for length, bi for two. So there you go. Then we have our embryonic development. This basically is dictating how things are going to come about. So we have the endoderm, endo for enter, enter, so inside, endoderm, which is the inner layer. Then we have the ectoderm, which is the outer layer. And then gastrulation, that's where it's all starting to develop, change around. And the first opening in the embryo. Then we have our three tissue layers. It's funny, I point like that, like you can see exactly what I'm pointing to if you're even looking in the corner of the screen. I'm moving on to the three tissue layers where it says protostome and deuterostome, because these are the two to actually pay attention to. And then the body cavity, we talk a little bit, but I know that this video part is kind of covering most of that. So that you're probably just going to want to look in your textbook for. But anyway, the three tissue layers, where I'm talking about the protostome and the deuterostome. The protostome is when the opening is a future mouth. Mouth. Deuterostome is when that opening will be the future anus, which is for excretion purposes. We'll go more into this in a little bit. Body cavity is talking about the colon and how everything is set. And yes, I said the colon and not the colon. Totally different thing. I hit the wrong button. There we go. So, biologists make hypotheses about the phylogeny of animal groups using evidence from the body plan characteristics, the fossil record, and again, molecular data. Yes, we are constantly going to toss in here about the molecular data because now that we have it and we can use it, it helps tremendously to be able to tell some stuff. Trying to remember if I gave you that lab this week. I don't think I actually gave you that lab. I think we did a completely different lab. Oh well, there was a lab that I used to give where you actually look at the molecular makeup of various animals and you see how closely related they are on the tree based on that. So I'm going to have to see if I have that. If I didn't give it to you, it might be one of your first extra credit options. Who knows? We'll find out. So, body plans right here. We're going to use this phylogenetic tree to discuss what shared derived character separates bilateralins from cnidarians. I am going to use the little laser pointer to point stuff out. So here we have our ancestral protist, and then we're over here. We have no tissue, and that brings us to sponges. Sponges are plants. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment because they're going to be the next one we talk about. Then we have radial symmetry. So when we get our tissues, we come up here, we have radial symmetry, and that brings us to the cnidarians. And we're going to talk about them too. Then we branch off, and down here we have our bilateral symmetry, and all of these are in the bilaterals. So radial symmetry is a lot more basic. So what shared derived character separates them? The bilateral symmetry. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but it tells you right here on the chart. Inverts, invertebrate diversity. Sponges, told you we were getting to sponges. These are simple animals. They do not have true tissues. They tend to lack body symmetry. They're kind of like whatever. And these are usually marine, although some of them are found in freshwater. When it says marine, that means literally salt water. What happens here is they tend to filter their food from the water as it passes through the pores. So they're not like charging after their food. You don't see them chewing. It's a filter feeding kind of process. There are different types of sponges. And again, yes, these are animals. And so I usually like to freak my poor little class out by saying anybody who buys the natural sponge and uses it in the bath, you are basically rubbing a tiny animal corpse all over yourself. It's really gross. Just found it interesting. Okay. Ta-da. Checkpoint question. Why is it thought that sponges represent the earliest branch of the animal kingdom? Well, we have been covering various evolution stuff so far. Is there any way you could think of why? Right there. They're the most basic. They lack true tissues. Yeah. So basically they are the most basic, and then we're going to slowly get a little more complex as we move up the evolutionary chain. Now we're to the cnidarians. This would also include jellyfish. I didn't keep a picture of the jellyfish. I just kept these two because these are going to talk about a couple of the basics I wanted to talk about. So these are characterized by radial symmetry, 2 true tissue layers, gastrovascular cavity, and 2 body forms. We have polyps and medusa. So polyp means that the mouth part opens towards the top. So the sea anemone, where you've got the opening up here and that's how it consumes, that would be the polyp. Jellyfish, shaped like this and goes along, that is known as a medusa. Now, the main reason I keep this picture is because I really like the hydra, and I like people to see the hydra. It's very, very tiny. Normally, you get to see these in a lot of labs with a microscope. They're tiny, and I just like it because it gets to show how geeky science people are, even though I get the fact that saying geeky science person is redundant. But if you look at Greek mythology, if anybody reads Greek mythology, there's the hydra. The hydra is the one that you cut off the head, grows more back, blah, blah, blah. But that's literally what this guy is named after, because look at it, he's got all these little parts. So, I don't know. I think they're cool. Maybe not as cool as the bacteria thing that I showed in the previous PowerPoint, but they're still pretty cool. All right, checkpoint question. What are 3 functions of a cnidarian's gastrovascular cavity? Well, we have digestion, we have circulation, and physical support and movement. Again, way more basic than what you think of for most animals. Now, the other thing, and the header of this kind of points it out, Cnidarians, these guys have stinging cells. These are things that kind of hurt when they hit you. Not covering it really in here. I don't have any great images, but seriously, the way they sting is phenomenal, and I would highly recommend checking it out. Look it up online. Go to YouTube and check it out. And for people who say that they have been stung by a man-o-war, ask to see the scars. Because if you do a quick Google search of man-o-war and stings, you will see what most people seem to claim is a man-o-war is not quite a man-o-war. They're very, very distinctive. And you should know what one looks like if you ever go hanging out at a beach. And know that if they actually go up on shore, I don't mean like they're walking up shore, they can't do that. But if they get washed up on shore, they can still sting you. So be careful. They're insanely hard and crazy stings. They're bad, but they're so cool. So check them out. No, that's not a requirement, but I mean, why wouldn't you check them out? You should. So now we are moving on to the simplest of the bilateral animals. We are to flatworms. These guys have no body cavity. We're going to have a picture in a second. Has a gastrovascular cavity and a simple nervous system. They live in marine, freshwater, and damp terrestrial habitats. We have things called flukes and tapeworms. These are both parasitic flatworms with very complex life cycles. So here, free-living flatworm. It's a planarian. Those are not actual eyes. They're called eye cups. They look like eyes. Nothing is quite what you tend to think. And again, bilateral symmetry. Now here's a tapeworm. I'd like you to take a good look at this, and then I think I have the next slide being a close-up of his head. But first, I want you to notice the head with the hooks and the sucker, and then look at the other picture where it shows this really long thing. So, right here, that's the scolex. This is the head. This is what you're seeing here. All of this are added. What they do is each time, each little generation's not the word, each growth time, they add one more segment, for lack of a better phrase. So it's like they start off small and then add one, add one, add one, add one, add one, add one, and it keeps on going all the way through. Tapeworms are phenomenal. They are creepy as all get out. So if you take a look here, notice it's pointing to the hooks and the sucker. This is because this guy is fastening himself good and tight into somebody's system. I say somebody because it can be an animal or it can be a person. I mean, yes, people are animals, but you know what I mean by that. And I just don't feel like constantly saying non-human animal. A couple of things about this tapeworm that I always love to share. One, if you are a bleeding heart like myself and you tend to attempt to rescue like every animal on the planet, if you ever find an animal and you're taking care of it and every time they get up and they move, it looks like little bitty pieces of rice left behind, those are tapeworm eggs. So be very, very aware. If you see that, make sure to be washing your hands very well, cleaning the entire area, and get the animal to a vet for treatment. Big one right there. Now, the other one is a lot of people used to think that if you have a tapeworm, then that just means you don't gain weight. In reality, what the tapeworm is doing is it's holding tight into the system, and then it's absorbing the nutrients. It's not just the calories, it's the nutrients that they're absorbing. And then they just continue to grow longer and longer and longer and longer. It's insane. Now, back in the, I can't remember if it's the 50s or the 60s, but back in the day, they were marketing to have an easy way to lose weight. So in that type of thing, the US is still exactly the same. Anyone who's ever been up for any amount of time throughout the day has seen a whole bunch of infomercials telling you this is the easiest way to lose weight. You don't have to change anything about your life, just do this. And that's what they did back here is you don't have to watch what you eat. You don't have to exercise. Just take this little pill. Well, back then, the little pill contained tapeworms. Like, there you go. So all these little 50s, 60s housewives swallowed these pills and planted a tapeworm in their body. Not really thinking about it, they just thought that just meant they wouldn't have to diet. Well, if you remember that previous slide here, let me help you. Look how long this thing can get. It continues to grow and continues to grow and continues to grow. You have two things that happen. One, it continues to grow until a part of it starts to come out. Sit on that and think about that for a minute. Two, it also ends up taking away your nutrition, your nutrients. And so a lot of the people end up having a lack of nutrition. They're not very healthy. Now take a good look at this face. Look at those hooks. It doesn't come out easily. So it takes a bit to get rid of the tapeworm. So now, just for fun, think about those 50s, 60s housewives when they found out this is what was inside them. It's pretty gross, kind of funny. Please don't just try to take the easy way out. Never a good idea. All right, flatworms are the simplest of bilateral animals. Flatworms and cnidarians differ in symmetry, with flatworms being what? And cnidarians being what? But the animals of both phyla have I went ahead and just filled in the answers for you, so here you go. We have bilateral symmetry for the flatworms, radial symmetry for the cnidarians, but both of them have a gastrovascular cavity. Now, nematodes, also known as roundworms, they also have bilateral symmetry. Now they have 3 tissue layers, non-living protective cuticle that is shed periodically, and a complete digestive tract. Some nematodes, free-living decomposers, while others are plant or animal parasites. Most of the time when you're thinking of a nematode or roundworm, most people tend to think of the parasite type. Yeah. Trying to decide exactly what all to say about that, but I think I'll just leave it for now. So, what is the advantage of a complete digestive tract? Different parts of the digestive tract can be specialized for different functions. No kidding. So, yeah. Why is it that I have to click it like twice almost every time? Mollusks. These have a muscular foot which functions in locomotion. And what the foot is not typically what most people think of as a foot. Just going to throw that out there. A visceral mass, which contains most of the internal organs. Getting back to that in a second. Mantle, which may secrete a shell that encloses the visceral mass. And a circulatory system. And then many of these feed with a rasping radula, which is used to scrape up food. So, muscular foot. When you hear foot, you think like one of your feet, or, we know I'm obsessed with cats. You think of the cat's paw as a foot. For the mollusks, a lot of times it's going to look more like a tongue that they're using for the foot. Just going to point that out. Visceral. This is one of the words that you are going to definitely need to remember because we come upon this a lot. Not just visceral mass, but visceral. Viscera basically means guts. If you have ever watched a horror movie or a crime drama or any of those types of things, and then they say that somebody was eviscerated, that means the guts were taken out. So there you go. Visceral mass, basically most of the stuff from the inside. So here you go. This is showing you a mollusk, and it's trying to show you the visceral mass is holding all that stuff inside. Here it's showing you the foot. And so on this one, you might be able to still imagine it as a foot. But when we talk about the bivalves, like a clam, you don't ever think of a clam as having a foot. And then here's the radula. This is the thing that kind of sticks out and pulls things into the mouth. So very, very, very basic, but it works. It's slowly moving up the evolutionary ladder. That brings us to our gastropods. Gastro for stomach, because your gastrointestinal area, that's your stomach. So gastro, stomach. Pod for foot. So gastropods mean stomach foot. So they move along on their stomach. Their stomach acts as their foot. There you go. I think the sea slug's kind of cool looking. Then we have our bivalves. I just made a mention of this a second ago. Bivalves. These are the guys in the shells like this. So your clams, oysters, scallops, that kind of thing. Oh, mussels. These are all bivalves. And then cephalopods. Oh, I love these. Cephal for head, pod for foot. So this basically translates to head foot. And so you've got the head with the feet straight out of it. The nautilus is really interesting looking, but I really like octopus. I think I talked about them at the beginning of the quarter, but I really can't remember if that was this class or another class. But I always tell people they should look up stuff about an octopus because they are insanely smart, really, really cute, and so different. These are little smart butt creatures, and you can see ones where they figure out how to open a jar to get what's inside, or there's ones, the mimic octopus is just fascinating to watch videos on. But there are videos of this, and I've seen this one happen in person at an aquarium place somewhere in Florida. I can't remember the exact place I was. It was for a field trip for one of my biology classes. But anyway, guy sitting there with the tank, there's an octopus in the tank behind him, and he has a tray that has fish in it. And when the guy's just talking, the octopus is just reaching up there and grabbing the food one by one as it wanted it. And the guy's not even paying attention. If you have ever watched Finding Dory, and you see that octopus that's like blending in, that was a mimic octopus, they can actually hop on out and take off on occasion. There's a current image that's been going around recently, and it shows an octopus just cruising right along on a beach. They're pretty cool. Anyway, cephalopod, head foot. Now, annelids. These are segmented worms. So, they have segmentation, subdivision of the body along its length into a series of repeated parts, a nervous system, and a closed circulatory system. This is where the blood remains enclosed in vessels throughout the body. So that's what closed circulatory system means. Many invertebrates, like the mollusks and arthropods, have an open circulatory system. And for that one, the blood's pumped through the vessels in open body cavities. So here is an earthworm. Now, one, you see the inset picture of the guy holding a giant Australian earthworm. Can you imagine seeing an earthworm that size? Another thing, fascinating. You can see that we're getting a lot more detailed here with this worm when we look at this area right here. We have multiple hearts in an earthworm. And we've got this teeny tiny little itty bitty brain. And all these little bitty bristles, this is how it actually moves. Yeah, I think that's all I'm going to worry about on this one. Tapeworms and blood-sucking leeches are parasites. What are the key differences between these two? Well, both of them have repeated segments. The segments of the tapeworm are mostly filled with reproductive organs and then shed. So that's the little grains of rice I mentioned earlier. Tapeworms and flatworms with no body cavity and, I should say are, not and, their parasitic lifestyle, not even a gastrovascular cavity. So the tapeworms have to be inside something they cannot live without because they do not have a gastrovascular cavity. Leeches, however, have a body cavity and a complete digestive tract, and leeches are insanely interesting. We're going to have pictures in a second. So we have two major clades of the annelids. One is mostly mobile marine worms, and the other one are less mobile worms, including earthworms, leeches, and many tube dwellers. One way to remember this is right here. This is the root word area. If you have ever heard of, and now I'm blanking on my word as I say it and look at it. It's just running away from my head. Sedentary. Anyway, this basically means you're just sitting around. Gosh, I can't believe I'm messing up that word, but it happens. All right, look at this sandworm and the ragworm. Look at those legs. These guys can go nuts. You can look at those and know they're going to move quickly. So there you go. And then here are these. These are tube-dwelling annelids. So basically they just hang there. This sticks out. Those little frill-looking things are catching the food, and then they pull back inside to feed themselves. This one is a leech. Notice it says a medicinal leech. The cool thing about these is, yes, they will just take the blood right out of where it needs to come out of. They do have medical leeches. I normally talk more about the medical maggots because they are insanely fascinating. But the cool thing about leeches is they are hunters, and you can actually look at videos of leeches trying to chase something down. They basically track heat. So if you can actually have an occasion to pick up and hold a leech, you will notice they're less likely to attach along here, but at this part of your wrist, that's a higher blood concentration, I guess. Your veins are higher to the surface. It's going to be warmer. This is a pulse point. This is where they're going to go for because they want what's in here. I don't know. They're crazy. They're creepy. I think they're cool. When I get to the insects, I'm going to try to remember to tell you about the medical maggots. So, over 1 million species of arthropods, including crayfish, lobsters, crabs, barnacles, spiders, ticks, and insects. Yay! This is a big group. Huge. Diversity and success due to their segmentation, hard exoskeleton, which means the skeleton is on the outside, which means they're always ready for Halloween, right? And jointed appendages. That's pretty much why they have the name. Arthropod, pod, feet. There you go. As an arthropod grows, it must periodically shed its old exoskeleton and secrete a larger one, which is called molting. So, imagine, if you will, you're wearing your skeleton on the outside. If you're going to grow, that's going to keep you from getting larger. That's why when they're going to grow, they have to chuck it. If you watch SpongeBob SquarePants, or if you ever have watched it, they actually have a lot of scientifically accurate stuff in there. And there's one episode where Mr. Krabs is going to go to his high school reunion, but then he can't go because he sheds his shell right beforehand. That's actually pretty much what happens. It was just because he was getting bigger. So, structure of a lobster. This is an arthropod. You have right here cephalothorax. So cephal for head, and then thorax. So all of this goes together. So that's the cephalothorax. Head, thorax, it's all one piece, not separated. And then the abdomen, what we always think of as a tail, this is technically their abdomen. And then the horseshoe crab, I had to keep this one because I find these guys fascinating. I grew up constantly going to my grandparents' house in Long Island, and they had Little Peconic Bay as their backyard, and I used to go down there, and after a storm, every time I would walk up the beach and I would find flipped over horseshoe crabs, and I would always flip them back so they could scurry back into the ocean. I just find these things fascinating, can't tell you why, but they're pretty cool. I wish we had fossils or like parts of these to show you in class. Then we have our arachnids. This is the stuff that most people are terrified of. So we have our scorpions, spiders, dust mites. I don't like mites, they're gross. Scorpions are fascinating. Did you know that scorpions glow under black light? They do, unless they have recently molted. So there is something in the hardened exoskeleton of a scorpion that glows under black light. Interesting. Ta-da. Then we have our millipede. Although that doesn't look like a normal millipede to me. And then this is our centipede. The main thing to look here is, look at this, there's one pair of legs per segment. So one pair, one pair, one pair. Meanwhile, on this image of the millipede, notice there are two pairs per segment. So again, this is not what you normally see when you hear a millipede, but it is a good example because you can actually see that it's two pairs of legs per segment. That's the real difference between a millipede and a centipede. Some people will tell you that a centipede has 1,000 legs and a millipede has 1,000,000. No, that's not true. Millipede, again, has two pairs of legs per segment. Meanwhile, a centipede has one pair of legs per segment. And a centipede is what's called ventrally dorsal flattened. They look flat. Millipede's normally rounded, centipede is normally flat. And the centipede is the one that can typically bite you and hurt you. Millipedes normally are not anything. I don't think they even normally have biting parts. A lot of people actually have pet millipedes. They're pretty cool. That's another thing you should totally look up on YouTube is just the typical big millipede. Look at it walk because I love watching that wave for its feet. All right, crustaceans. This is where we have our crabs. They have a picture here of goose barnacles. Barnacles are like the most boring thing on the planet. They literally just sit there. That little part comes out so they can get the food and then pulls in. There's not many animals I'm going to tell you are really boring, but barnacles are one of those things that are really boring. All right, insects. These are the most successful group of animals. Nearly 75% of all identified animal species are insects. Might be as many as 30 million insect species. For an insect, you typically have a head, a thorax, an abdomen, 3 sets of legs, and most of them have wings. Not all of them, but most of them have wings. Insect life cycles often include metamorphosis. This is where the animal will take on a different body form as it gets older. So you go from larva to adult. More than 80% of insect species undergo a complete metamorphosis. So there will be a free-living larvae that transforms into a pupa, which then goes into an adult. So other insect species undergo incomplete metamorphosis, where the transition from larvae to adult is achieved through multiple molts. So you're basically seeing it happen. Easiest example for these metamorphosis would be, right off the bat, you know I'm going to say butterfly because that's what most people think of. You have the caterpillar, and then it does the cocoon, and then pooh, a whole brand new little butterfly comes out the other end. They're not the only ones that do this, but that's the obvious one. Then you have the incomplete one. I'm so sorry, but basically think of a roach. You see a little itty bitty baby roach, and it looks like the tiniest little bug, and you're like, oh, it's not that big a deal. But as it gets bigger, it becomes that roach. I hate roaches. I'm also allergic to them, but I hate roaches. Another example, because here's my time to bring it in. For this would be a fly. Again, I made a comment about there being the medical maggots. A maggot is fly larvae. So those are like baby flies. They don't have wings or anything yet. They just look like these little nasty worm thingies. But why they are cool is maggots will only eat dead flesh. This is why they have medicinal maggots. They actually have hospital grade maggots, because they discovered in some kind of war way back when that when somebody got injured and gangrene was beginning to set in, the maggots would eat all of the infected flesh. They would not touch the living flesh. They would only eat the dead flesh. And this became a very safe, question mark, way of taking care of a massive wound infection. Now granted, having fly larvae, say in your leg, munching on you is a bit creepy, but it's actually less traumatic to your body than going in there and just carving entire sections out. So pretty cool. That's why we have medical maggots. And here we go. This one is a complete metamorphosis of the rhinoceros beetle. We have the larvae here, pupa stage, and then bam, we've got our adult. Can you guess why he's called the rhinoceros beetle? Pretty sure one of these are in a bug's life. Now, this is showing you a grasshopper in order to show you some of the specialized stuff. So we have the individual head, and then we have the thorax, and then we have the abdomen. This guy has his wings, and then those big specialized jumping legs, which is also what they use to make that annoying sound. I know some people like that cricket sound. I'm hearing it back there right now. I hate that sound. Mouth parts here. We have the rest of the legs. Remember, when we talked about this for the insects, we said 6 legs. So hexapoda is actually the grouping. Hex for 3, poda for feet. So look, we have 1, 2, 3. 3 pairs of feet. And then the antenna. Now, extraordinary success of insects is due to the body segmentation, the exoskeleton, jointed appendages, which means, you know, they can bend and stuff, flight, waterproof cuticle. The cuticle is what's on the outer covering, and a complex life cycle with short generations and large numbers of offspring. The reason they have the different stages and stuff is because if you do it this way, the offspring and the parents are not competing for resources because they actually have completely different resources. Then you have some that are so specialized, like the mayfly, where the adult version doesn't even have mouth parts, so they can't even eat, so they're not taking anything away from their offspring. And if you're going to ask, well, then what happens? Well, they die quickly because they can't eat. So specialized appendages and protective color patterns have also played a major role in the success. So some of these guys have actually evolved to look a very particular way to keep from getting munched on. So we have the stick insect. Stick bug is what most people call them, or walking stick. Literally looks like a stick. So if you're a bird or something that eats bugs, your chances are you're going to leave it alone. Then we have the katydid. These are some of my favorites. They come in so many different varieties. Every one of them looks like some kind of a leaf. So you're watching something and then you just see this leaf walking along, and it's pretty cool. And then this caterpillar. This is a caterpillar, when in reality, if you look at it, it looks like a piece of bird poop. And so most birds are just not even going to pay attention to it. Then you have the really cool ones. This is a moth caterpillar. So this is literally a caterpillar. If you are a bird that eats caterpillars, are you going to even possibly try this one? I'm thinking not. It's pretty cool though. And then we have this guy. This is the owl butterfly. Look how detailed this tail is versus the actual owl. So when this butterfly is just sitting there on the tree, birds coming along, all it has to do is whoosh, spread out those wings like that, and all of a sudden the birds think there's an owl, which is a predator, staring right at them, and then they leave them alone. So really, really cool. Now, how did the arthropod body plan with its variety of distinct body segments evolve? Well, they have a couple of different ideas. One hypothesis proposes that an increase in the number of homeotic genes, the master control genes that direct animal development, and we've talked about master genes, lead to the diversity of segment and appendage types. And in order to test this, a bunch of scientists compared these genes in arthropods with velvet worms, which are their closest living relatives. The results showed that the velvet worms have complete set of arthropod genes, the homeotic genes. No additional genes arose after the lineages diverged. So they had exactly those same little parts that went, boop, let's do this. Therefore, researchers concluded that body segment diversity did not result from the appearance of it. Because if the same gene is here as in here, then it can't be what caused it to change. I understand this is kind of like blah with the way I'm saying it, but this goes to show where they were thinking, hey, we think this came from that, so common ancestor. But when they found that this one master gene was in both of them, and clearly it didn't do the same thing, that lets them know that's not what caused it. So this would be failed to confirm this hypothesis. Then they came up with their alternative hypothesis that proposed that changes in the regulation of the gene expression led to the diversity of segment and appendage type. In order to test this one, they compared the gene expression patterns in the embryos of a centipede and a velvet worm. These results were supporting the hypothesis about the diversification of the arthropods occurred through changes in the regulation of homeotic gene expression. So here they found a slight different change that helped. So they were able to show that we have here, there's a divergement that came here, then there's a common ancestor that gave arthropods and velvet worms. And yeah, so basically they started off by looking at them, trying to decide, because here is a centipede and here is a velvet worm. And then here is where they're actually comparing the details. So we've got our legs and the antenna. Can't find my little arrow there. There we go. Cnidarians. Most people have heard of these, they just don't realize they have heard of these. This gives us our sea stars, what you probably grew up hearing called a starfish. They're not really called starfish anymore, they're actually called sea stars because a starfish makes you think fish, and these totally do not belong in the same category as fish. So we have sea stars, sand dollars, and sea urchins. They are slow moving, or they just hang out in one spot. All of these are marine, so every one of these belong to salt water. And they are radially symmetrical as adults, and they are deuterostomes along with the chordates. So as we're moving up the evolutionary ladder, this is getting us a little bit closer because of this right here. Now, echinoderms, they have an endoskeleton. This means the skeleton is now moving inside. Then they have a hard calcium-containing plates just underneath the thin skin. Water vascular system based on a network of water-filled canals that branch out into what they call tube feet. And the cool thing, they can regenerate a lost arm. So if you find a sea star and instead of saying it has 5 legs, it only has 4, over a period of time, that 5th one tends to grow back. Contrast the skeleton of an echinoderm with that of an arthropod. Well, right off the bat, you can say one's inside, one's outside, so there you go. Echinoderm has an endoskeleton, EN for enter, so inside. And arthropod has an exoskeleton, EX for exit, so outside. Here is our sea star. Stomach is inside. We have all these various canals. We have the tube feet, and there you go. If we had an actual sea star to play with, and you could look at this right here, the little tube feet, they move along, and that's how they walk. This is showing you right here the tube feet. This is a sea star feeding on a clam. So he got a clam and he's trying to force it open so he can munch on it. It's a sea urchin. And now we are finally to chordates. This was mentioned last week, and if you actually watched the 2 videos you were supposed to for your embryology lab, they made reference to the chordata, the notochord. They made a comment about the notochord, and this is where it starts to show up, right here. The chordates. Oh, it's so funny. I sat there and had to think on the word notochord, and it's right here on the slide. Anyway, phylum chordata, defined by a dorsal hollow nerve cord, so all the way down, flexible supportive longitudinal rod, which is the notochord, and then we have our pharyngeal slits and a muscular postanal tail. The notochord is what slowly works up and becomes our spine, our vertebrae, and everything goes around it. Now we have tunicates and lancets. These do not have a backbone, and they use their pharyngeal slits for suspension feeding. The adult tunicates are stationary and attached, but their larvae look like little tadpoles. They're like moving around. And the lancelets are small blade-like chordates that live in marine sands. And yes, you're going to have a picture in a minute. Checkpoint question. What 4 features do we share with invertebrate chordates such as lancelets? Well, human embryos and invertebrate chordates all have the dorsal hollow nerve cord, a notochord, pharyngeal slits, and a postanal tail. And if you had watched the videos and properly done the embryology lab from last week, you would have already seen all 4 of these. Here is a lancelet. That's what he looks like. And if you've ever been to the Georgia Aquarium, I think they have these in one of those areas. Here's the tunicate. You would not look at this and think this is a more specialized animal than the sponge, but it actually is. Kind of crazy, right? All right, now putting it all together. Invertebrates play a critical role in natural ecosystems and provide valuable services to humans. Example, freshwater mussels filter and improve water quality in the natural ecosystems, and this helps reduce the cost of water treatment for human use. So yay. So they're basically filtering out the water for us. Reef-dwelling cone snails produce a powerful painkiller in their venom. And I make reference to this later, and I am trying to remember if I talked about it in Bio 123 or not. I totally talk about it in environmental science. They're fascinating. And then most flowering plants are pollinated by animals, chiefly insects. This is why the whole thing about the honeybee collapse is terrifying, is because so much of our agriculture is pollinated by insects, by bees, and it's important to protect them. So deciding you just don't like them and you try to eradicate them, that's actually very detrimental to our health as a planet. We need them. Since it made that comment about the cone snails, I'm going to take a moment to tell you about the box jellyfish, because I realize I went right past the Cnidarians. Since this is a new book and a new presentation, I apparently forgot to put that back in there. So I'm going to tell you about the box jellyfish because I think it's fascinating. Box jellyfish, coast of Australia, teeny tiny little things, some of the strongest neurotoxin known to man. People are freaking out. These guys are little. They can get through a lot of the mesh for the protective netting for a lot of the beach areas. And people were trying to find a way to straight up get rid of these jellyfish because they were just deemed too dangerous. What they have discovered, similar to the cone snails, what they are producing, actually we can use as painkillers. And for the box jellyfish, they're finding that this is a painkiller that rivals morphine in effect, but it's 100% non-narcotic. And that's pretty phenomenal. And so all of this extra stuff out there is there for a reason. We just need to learn. So pretty cool. Here is a picture of a cone snail, and I wish I had thought enough to put a picture of a box jelly in here too. All right, showing us the honeybee collecting the pollen. Look at that, he's got all this little pollen right there on his little honeybee leg. Now, you should be able to do a whole bunch of this stuff and chit chat and discuss these types of things. Now, I just want you to point out how far we have come evolutionary-wise. So we have already talked about the algae that gave rise to the plants, then the plants came out of the water and got up on land. We have these trees, beautiful stuff everywhere, and now we have gone from sponges all the way up to chordates. And so the next PowerPoint, the next chapter, we finally get to vertebrates. And then we're going to get to cover a lot of really cool animals. And just so you know, I did not inundate the entire thing full of pictures of the animals I want to talk about. If I had, you would have so many pictures of like a hammerhead shark, goblin shark, lots of cats, big cats, whole lot of animals because I like animals. But I try to keep it as close to the textbook as possible. And I guess that's it. See you for the last chapter for week 2.